Welcome back, everyone, to another very special report from Catholic Family News. I am Brian McCall, the editor-in-chief of Catholic Family News, and I'm joined today by Dr. David Schmitt. Very happy to have him on the program, and we're going to be talking about COVID-19 vaccines. Dr. Schmitt is a neurophysiologist, and he is also an ethologist, that deals with behavior and biology. He's had many, many different jobs and positions around the country, around the world, including, among many others, at the Nobel Institute in Sweden, where he was doing some groundbreaking research. So welcome to our program today, Dr. Schmitt.
Why, thank you, Brian. Good to be here.
It is good to have you, a first time joining us. And today we're going to talk about the COVID-19 vaccines. Now, we have already covered these with respect to the pro-life issue, the issue related to abortion. And as we've reported, and you can see here if you're watching the video, we had a letter of one cardinal and 4 brave bishops, who included one U.S. bishop, who said that the vaccine should be refused because they are tainted by abortion. Either they're produced from aborted children or they're used, aborted children are used in testing. But then the USCCB, the U.S. Conference of Sometimes Catholic Bishops, as I call them, came out full throttle. Oh, it'd be better if it didn't have abortion, but go ahead, take it anyway. It's fine, no problem. No, nothing to worry about here. As we've said, they and Pope Francis are on board with the New World Order, Davos reset, take over the world with this new transhumanism that we did an interview with a wonderful priest about a couple of weeks ago. That's one issue, though. We looked at, again, the total breakdown of moral authority here of the many bishops who are not dealing with that abortion issue. But there is much more wrong with this vaccine and much more of serious concern than the abortion issue, which is important. And that's why we've invited Dr. Schmitt today, because he has done an incredible amount of research on these vaccines that are very different from other vaccines and that pose a lot of serious moral issues. So we're going to begin, first of all, with a little science lesson. Don't worry if you've had a long time since you had 7th grade biology. We're going to break it down, make it simple, but we're just going to explain biologically what's different about these vaccines and then get into why that creates moral problems. So Dr. Schmitt, why don't you begin by talking to us about these issues with this vaccine being an mRNA vaccine.
Great. And because sometimes it comes up, I just want to point out to the listeners that I am not a physician. I'm not a pulmonologist, intensive care specialist. I'm not an epidemiologist, microbiologist, infectious disease specialist, immunologist, or vaccinologist. So, but I am a general. I'm going to approach this as a general biologist, and I think that's the appropriate level for this discussion. To start off with, let me introduce a concept called the central dogma of biology. Francis Crick, who was a co-discoverer of the structure of DNA, enunciated this term in around 1978. And the central dogma of biology is quite simple. It says that the chemical repository or the library of genetic information that specifies who you are biologically, that material, DNA, and which resides in the nucleus of the cell, the information from DNA flows to another form of nucleic acid called RNA. The RNA you could think of as being like a blueprint or a photocopy that you're taking from the library in the nucleus out to the cytoplasm of the cell, which you could think of as sort of the workplace or the factory floor of the cell. And there, the information in RNA is transferred, the technical word is translated, into proteins. and proteins are a major structural and functional part of the cell. In their functional aspect, they control chemical reactions, the many, many thousands of chemical reactions that go on. So, and also, if I can, I want to introduce another idea, novel here, and I'm going to call it the central dogma of civilization. And what I'd like to do is wind up this conversation today by bringing those two things together, because I guarantee you the people who at the World Economic Forum, the Klaus Schwabs, the Bill Gateses of the world, they fully intend to fuse every aspect of information, the biological, the communicative, the governmental, the military, entertainment. They plan to bring this all together for a unified resetting, as you use the word, of the world, as they use the word.
Yes.
So yeah, back to the biology then. Really quickly, the distinguishing characteristic of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines that we hear about so much is that they are RNA virus, RNA based, and these RNA based, and sometimes you hear the little prefix on the front there, mRNA. That simply means messenger RNA, and so the viruses that are involved here, the coronavirus, the basis of the COVID pandemic, as it's called. This is a virus that has as its principal genetic material, not DNA, but RNA. Some viruses have DNA, some have RNA. This particular type of virus, the coronavirus, is an mRNA-based virus. Now,
so these two approved vaccines, as you say, they are based on using mRNA that you introduced. How does that differ from other vaccines like smallpox or measles or things that were developed, decades ago? What's the difference with those vaccines?
Good question. So those more traditional vaccines utilized either a weakened form of either a virus or other type of pathogen, called an attenuated pathogen, or they broke them apart and they used some parts of those pathogens and the idea being that they would, once injected into a recipient's body, those attenuated or fragmented pieces of pathogens would provoke the body's natural defense mechanism, the immune system, to mount a defensive response against the invader. And in this case, the invader would be an intentional one. It would be a vaccine. And the idea would be if you could ramp up the body's own defense mechanism, somehow that would help it fight the natural infection if it ever encountered it.
So the body, by getting this either dead or as you said, partial version of the virus, would create an antibody, which I think you've said is kind of a Y-shaped structure. And then those antibodies would be around so that if you did actually come in contact with the real virus, the theory is you'd have these antibodies ready to go attack would it be called an antigen, what they would attack?
Right.
Yes.
Right. So the antibody is a protein. Mm-hmm. As you said, it's Y-shaped, and the two top ends of the Y have specific recognition sites for the particular chemical and three-dimensional structure of the chemical labels, if you will, the antigens on the introduced material or pathogen, and that there would be a binding, and and also there would be a ramping up of the soldiers, if you will.
Yeah.
It would so you would have many of these antibody soldiers in place when you encountered the natural pathogen.
But those kind of vaccines took decades and a long time, even longer sometimes to produce. And the coronavirus, they've been trying to create vaccines for different coronaviruses, other versions of COVID-19, not very successfully. So that's why, in order to shortcut the process, they decided to go with this messenger RNA version. Is that right?
Right. Now,
Yes.
just so the listeners know, there are many companies. I saw a figure over 100 that are trying to produce vaccines based on all sorts of mechanisms. So it's not a given that we must necessarily go with this RNA technology.
Right. No, there are many ways, yes, but they
right.
wanted to do that because they thought they could get it out more quickly. So Pfizer,
Well,
for example, and Moderna. So now explain. Now we understand the difference for the other kinds. What is it about how does the mRNA vaccine, like the Pfizer or the Moderna one, how does that work? And maybe then you need to explain to us the problems it could create.
Sure. So in this case, what these pharmaceutical companies have done is they've taken a segment of the mRNA from the coronavirus, and they've packaged it. It's not going to be packaged in the virus's normal natural capsid, but rather they've packaged it in a kind of a oily lipid layer, a nanoparticle structure that they can use to, once the mRNA vaccine is introduced into the body, this lipid structure fuses with the lipids of the recipient's cell membranes. At that point, once the fusion occurs, the RNA is introduced into the cell, and the idea then is that segment of RNA has enough information not to be reproducing itself, but to be producing these proteins called spike proteins. And if you've seen any of the myriad of cartoons out there of picturing the virus, it looks like a rubber ball with spikes on it. So those spike proteins, they've decided are a good target. And what happens is then those spike proteins are presented, if you will, on the surface of the host cell, and invite the host immune system to come along and to learn what the particular lock and key shape is needed from that spike protein in order to form a complementary antibody that the host can then ramp up again. I keep using that word because that's what biology does a lot. It forms these cascading processes of amplification. So it recognizes those spike proteins that are being presented, and then it makes many antibodies, or at least that's the intent, in response to that shape.
So maybe to make sure our listeners are with us, let me see if I've got this right. So rather than injecting into the body a form of the virus itself to trigger the immune system, as we said, this is taking a strand of RNA and in getting it into some cells within your body. That RNA then takes over that cell and causes the cell to grow, for lack of a better word, or sprout these spikes that we've seen on the coronavirus cell. So it's sort of turning your cell into a cell, in the layman's term, maybe that looks like a coronavirus cell with the spikes, to then trigger the immune reaction of your body. Is that a
that's close enough?
close enough?
Yeah,
All right, for our
close enough.
non-expert. Okay, so now what's the problem then with inserting this foreign messenger RNA into our body cells?
Right. So what they're doing is, rather than relying upon these either, again, fragments or attenuated viruses floating around in the blood and the fluid of the body, they're going into the cell and they are partially hijacking, like pirates, if you will. They're hijacking the normal mechanism for making proteins. They are inserting blueprint, foreign blueprint, into the cell and using the cell's machinery to make these proteins. These proteins that, by the way, are part of the pathogenic process. So, the process of immunization is a process of partially mimicking the pathogenic process. And so there are some things. Now, these are speculations, but after all, remember, these companies and these regulators and these physicians and scientists that are designing this, they engage in quite a bit of speculation about the potential numbers of who are going to die and the extent of this pandemic, as they call it. So I think we should be allowed some leeway in speculating about the possible problems. And in fact, they as part of the process, they have and they should have. And they should make them much more effective. These public meetings where they take input. So, okay, what are some of the direct biological problems that we might imagine that we want the pharmaceutical companies and the regulators to address? And one would be the potential of autoimmune diseases. After all, you are labeling a great number of cells of your body with markers of a disease. And the potential there for things going wrong is real. And so, in other words, you are inviting your body to attack some of your own cells. And so we call those autoimmune diseases when that becomes a runaway process. And so that's number one.
So when your immune system gets kind of hyperstimulated and kind of out of control, that's
correct.
Autoimmune, yes. Okay.
Yes. And we don't have any guarantees from them, but they don't know. They can't tell us what the extent. I mean, they've done these two companies, Pfizer and Moderna, have done some short, they say month-long, but, really very short studies. And if you read their protocols for the approval process, it's even more concerning because they don't use words typical of medicine like diagnosis. They use words like the disease was confirmed and adjudicated. Well, that sounds like something you do down at the magistrate court with a parking ticket.
Right.
So, see, and they had to do that. They had to get it out of the medical legal framework and put it into really a manufacturing framework that, even though they're indemnified against being sued, they still, like good lawyers, they're concerned. So,
Yes. So, again, to remind our viewers, because we've covered this before, unlike any other medication, pharmaceutical companies, you can't sue them. They are exempted from any liability. If they give you a vaccine that kills you, that hurts you, that does something, they have Congress passed a law in the 1980s says you can't sue them. They are immune. And there's a
right.
special secret administrative proceeding that they call a vaccine court, but it's not a court. It's a
Mm,
phony name, where you can go and maybe get some compensation from the government, but estimates are that fewer than sort of 1% of injuries actually get some compensation there. But unlike in the other case, if they produce a medicine that kills people, they can get sued for millions, billions of dollars and have to pay out. And that's an incentive, hopefully, to be a little more careful. Unlike with vaccines, where and the same as these vaccines for coronavirus, if they kill billions of people, nobody can touch them.
right.
Yes.
Another problem is that, so we've hijacked the protein making machinery of the cell. Now, it turns out that of the thousands of proteins that your genome holds information for fashioning, 95% of those proteins are found uniquely in the nervous system.
Hmm.
And so what this means is, that's a biologist's way of saying the nervous system is extremely important. And therefore, if things go wrong in the making of proteins, there is a great likelihood that it's going to be manifested in neurological diseases of communication, cognition, movement, motor impairments. We've already seen in the case of vaccines where this has happened. So I'm really not speculating here. Another thing we need to be worried about are reproductive disabilities.
Interesting.
And so, for instance, I mentioned, I used the phrase before about lock and key. So these antibodies and antigens, they have a lock and key match. Also, I didn't mention this before, but there's also a cellular response to the immune response, not just an antibody response, but a cellular response where cells are sent like a hunting dog, I guess, after a invader, an antigen, a pathogen that the immune system has been taught to recognize. So, for instance, there's a case of where, again, thinking back to this lock and key mechanism, there was something on one of the vaccines. There's some antigens that looked enough like a hormone called human chorionic gonadotrophin, and this sort of crossover allowed the host's immune system to attack this mechanism, which is critical for the maintenance of pregnancy. So you see, those are just that's one example of the kind of.
And that's why I think we've reported, for example, that Bill Gates and his corrupt organizations that were pushing some vaccines in India, he was thrown out of India because they found out that these vaccines he was supposedly charitably giving out in India were sterilizing effectively, as you're saying, preventing Indian women who received them from conceiving and bearing children to term. So again, that's not a new concern you're just coming up with. We've seen evidence of that in that story, for example.
Right, and in fact, I'm going to come to this 2 steps away from here.
Okay.
But let me just get in one more thing here, and that is by presenting these antigens on the surface of the cell, there's also the potential for let's just call it an exhaustion of the immune system. So again, if the process in any way becomes a runaway process, or remember, there's tremendous variability in how people's bodies respond to these kind of introductions. If the immune system becomes exhausted in any way, then you're facing the possibility of infections and also malignancies, cancer, because the tamping down of cancerous cells in the body is something our bodies are doing all the time. And so if we do anything to impair our ability to stop those cells from getting a foothold, then we have a growing tumor going. So, but you bring up something that I really wanted to get at, and that is when you are introducing something like RNA, you're introducing a nucleic acid, and it's true that it's not DNA, so you're not introducing it into the nucleus per se directly. At least that's not the intent of the pharmacologist.
Right.
However, there are things like viruses. There are viruses out there like the retroviruses, and retroviruses are interesting viruses because they have the machinery to take RNA blueprint and then reverse engineer it back to DNA.
Oh,
and
wow.
So, in a sense, you are potentially introducing DNA into the host. Now, that in itself, I mean, the pharmaceutical companies will say, gosh, well, this is something going on in the cytoplasm, or we just don't think that this is going to happen, that something's going to be introduced into the so the pharmaceutical companies tell us that they really don't believe that there's going to be this crossover of nucleic acid from the virus into the DNA of the host. And yet we know, in fact, that does occur. In fact, it might be one of the reasons for existence of viruses, but that's getting off into a more novel form of biology. However, I watched the FDA meeting on emergency use authorization, and the representative from the pharmaceutical company simply dismissed this possibility when it was asked by one of the panelists, one of the scientists, simply dismissed it as not a likelihood. However, I do think this is one of the things we need to press them on, making sure that we don't have this aberrantly made DNA inserted as a provirus into our DNA. Now, this brings up two other kind of concerning things. One is that we already have DNA sequences from living things being patented. And so that is a whole area of molecular innovation and patent law that really needs to be, that's wide open. I
Yes.
can't really comment on it. I don't know if anybody really knows how to handle that one. But related to it in a kind of negative way is we've opened up the possibility with these technologies of bioweaponry.
Yes.
So, I mean, and if you say, "Oh, come on," I mean, you guys are really getting conspiratorial and fanciful. Well, I mean, think about the anthrax scare. I mean, whatever the nature of that was, clearly the U.S. government and other governments believe that this is a very, very real possibility. So we shouldn't allow ourselves to simply be waved off as having sort of fanciful concerns about this. And think about it. Look at this coronavirus. They have targeted this virus targets a particular protein receptor. It's found in a variety of places. One of the first places the virus is going to encounter it is in the respiratory passages, like the nasal cavity, but also in the lungs. And it's a protein called ACE, and ACE2 particularly. And this is a protein that I encountered before in previous lab work. It was involved in regulation of blood pressure, and so this is how to give the listener an understanding. This is how specific these things can be potentially designed to target. And notice too that something's very interesting about this particular COVID phenomenon is that it seems to select for the geriatric class, the elderly people.
Yes, and that's what we've seen, although the death rate from the virus, even using their numbers, which we don't trust, but is around 1.5%. But for older people, that does seem to be higher for people, in that population.
Sure. But I guess my point is that as we've opened this Pandora's box of manipulating, in particular, viruses and viral genetic codes, we find in that box plenty of opportunity for real malicious mayhem, and the idea that human beings will not go there is completely naive. Just look at the viruses on your computer.
Yes.
And so the potential for hacking there is great. And so, and just to leave this point with the listeners, just think of the possibilities for targeting ethnic groups. Because I mean, there are definite differences in ethnic groups genetically, and those are all potential sites. There's potential for selectively attacking a particular ethnic group. And if our listeners really want to see an exploration of what might be possible, I'd invite them to take a look at a recent production. This is the first of two parts, I think there will be two, by Whitney Webb, where she explores a whole program at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center involved in trying to design, they say, preemptive responses to viral bioweaponry. But of course, in order to do this, they need to create lots of novel pathogens.
Yes.
So that becomes a problem. And and also the whole UPMC story, University of Pittsburgh story. I'm from Pittsburgh, by the way. It has another aspect to it, and I was struck by this when I visited there back in 2008. I rode around the city, and everywhere I looked, there was a University of Pittsburgh Medical Center clinic. The U.S. Steel building had atop of it replaced its original logo with UPMC.
Huh.
And people there tell me that University of Pittsburgh has bought up everything, even these strip malls and clinics and what have you.
Wow.
So this is what what we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is the fusion of all sorts of information systems, like your personal medical records. And eventually, if they can get a hold of it, like when you go for your PCR test, there's the potential of them getting a hold of your DNA.
Yes.
And then so we confuse the medical records with information about what viruses you might most likely be vulnerable. Okay, so
again, you point out here again, we can see the dangers here, and we know that the globalists, are part of this. We know that that's part of their idea of, by doing this way, creating this potential for these kind of bioweapons, targeted viruses, etc. But if we can maybe jump back down to the individual human being level, and we've talked about how this is inserting RNA into your cells, actually changing your body. I'd like to read you a section of the catechism and have you talk about kind of the way this vaccine works, kind of a concern that raises for you from this provision. So this is coming from 2297 of the catechism. And again, one of our criticisms of the new catechism, it's often a little poorly worded. It lumps a lot of things together. So again, it has some drafting flaws, but there still are truthful statements if you wade through it. And here's one I'm going to pick out of 2297. It says, except when performed for strictly therapeutic medical reasons, directly intended amputations, mutilations, and sterilizations performed on innocent persons are against the moral law. So again, just examining that principle, it's saying, which is a true moral principle, out of respect for the creation, our human body created by God in his image and likeness, we can't just go along mutilating or amputating our body except for strictly therapeutic reasons. So I can't just say, I just don't like my arm, I'm just going to cut it off, or I'm going to cut off my finger, just because I like the way it looks to have 4 fingers. But if I have a tumor on my arm that is, going to kill me, then what it's saying is, well, therapeutically, to have a therapy to treat the cancer, if the only thing I can do is cut that tumor out and I have to amputate part of my arm, well, then that amputation would be morally justified. So that's, again, what this principle of Catholic moral theology that is very ancient says. Now, given what you've told us about mRNA, what concerns morally do you think that provision may raise for us in these vaccines?
Well, right. Excellent. So this is really a major part of yes. why we're talking today is that you could not imagine a more profound way of mutilating a human body than to alter the genetic code. Remember the central dogma? The information that makes you what you are resides in the nucleus, principally of the cell. And so if you mutilate that library of information, you are mutilating potentially a wide variety of structures in the body. So, in this first part of that statement where it says, and I just want to alert people to this so they don't think that there's a loophole here. when it says for therapeutic purposes. So people might say, well, isn't a vaccine a therapeutic purpose? Well, actually not. It's a preemptive measure. It's not being given to people who are ill. It's being given to the healthy population. In fact, giving a vaccine to somebody who already is ill can have
Can be
dire
hard. It can hurt
consequences.
them. Yeah, right. It's not therapeutic at all. Right.
Right. So
So again, to be
I
clear,
think
just so I can recap for everyone, that exception to the rule doesn't apply because you're not sick by definition if you get a vaccine. So there's no therapy.
correct.
There's no therapy. You're not healing yourself. And you are mutilating not just like your arm, as I talked about, cutting off your arm. You're mutilating your body at the cellular level by mutilating it. And I'd like to pick up on your analogy, Dr. Schmitt, about the library. So the difference is we have a library. If we're going to introduce an antigen, a sort of virus that comes into your body, just not even intentionally, but you come in contact with someone, you'd get in a virus. So say it's like a bad book gets into your library sort of collection and it's there and, oh, that's a bad book. It's there, but we could weed it out. As opposed to, I'm going to open a book in the library and change the words in it. So I'm going to take the Odyssey in the library. I'm going to open it. I'm going to take out pages and substitute different pages. If everyone can see, it's kind of maybe an analogy of the level of change that's different. It's not just introducing something into your body, it's actually changing your body on a cellular level. Is that, do you agree with that analogy? Does that make sense?
Oh, that's a beautiful analogy, and there's plenty of case law as well.
Yes.
Of engineering companies where somebody on a blueprint has shifted a decimal point, and a bridge has collapsed.
Yes.
Or think of the space shuttle, the problem with the O-ring.
Yes.
The engineers were jumping up and down and screaming and saying, "My goodness, we have to fix this. This has to be fixed." And yet the management said, "Gosh, we're on a tight scale." I'm really painting this with a broad brush. Right. We're on a tight schedule. We got to go with this. So, this is an analogy. When you tamper with the information process for the information system for both structures and processes, then you are really causing a problem. And, this is a good point to maybe mention something here that what we have is, and this is where I think this forum, your Catholic Family News Forum, is a very important one for us to be contributing to this COVID discussion. Because there is something that Catholics should have an understanding of. Certainly those who have been well educated in college should have an understanding of, but even your average Catholic in the pew should have received this by percolation. And it's this Aristotelian and Thomistic. By Thomistic, for those who aren't familiar with it, we're talking about Thomas Aquinas, one of the important philosophers in the church, who relied heavily on Aristotle. There is a notion of thinking about things in terms of their form and their matter. And so sometimes people get distracted by thinking that the important thing is the matter. And it certainly is. The matter is important in as much as it conveys the form, right?
Right.
So...
But the matter isn't you, right? Because as we know, the cells of our body that we have today, I mean, I don't know, we're about the same age, I guess, or maybe you're a little older. So I've been around for 50 years. This physical matter in my body today isn't the matter that I was born with, right? All those cells have died and moved on, but I'm the same person. And so it's not necessarily the physical matter, it's the form my soul that makes me who I am, that makes the cells that are in my body me as opposed to someone else. Or another, to use an ancient Greek analogy, they used to say that nobody swims in the same river twice, in the sense that
Right.
it's different water flowing through, but really what we know, it's the same river, because the form of that river, even if the water molecules are different, is the same. So it's really the form, as you're saying, that makes us who we are, and that form is what tells our matter, but it's, in a not very precise
Yes.
way, but tells our matter what we are. So yes, good, great. So maybe then pick up with that.
Yeah, and so that's perfectly stated. Even if we do have some cells like brain cells that have been around since we've been around,
Right.
it is true that the carbon and the oxygen and the phosphorus and the hydrogen, those things have most likely all been exchanged for others.
Yes.
So yes, the form is critical. The matter the matter of my arm as it is at this moment is in fact kind of important, because it does bear that information. So there's that aspect of it. You don't want to just cut it off for no reason. But it's important as the bearer of the information.
Yes.
And there's some other things where Catholics can start to impinge on this in a much more positive way. So, for instance, these and not just Catholic parishes, but lots of churches, different Protestant churches, Jewish temples, what have you. But again, let's focus on the Catholics here, because that's our framework. This masking, this process of masking and obsessively distancing ourselves at church and avoiding, for the Catholics, avoiding the sacraments is perilous. And this is an area where we have the opportunity of saying no in a very big way. And yet our bishops and our clerics seem to even outdo the civil authorities in most cases in the restrictions. And so I think that, Catholics need to overcome what I call, I don't want to get too far afield. It's not my expertise, but I just put it out there to start the discussion. What I consider to be malignant obedience. Okay. So, a type of obedience where actually they do need to be voicing to, the hierarchy. We have serious adult questions about this, and we need to approach this, and we need to certainly begin the discussion, and then we need to bring some force to bear on this.
Absolutely. When the bishops say, "Oh, you don't need the sacraments. We're just closing up. No big deal. Go away." We need to say, "Wait a minute. We have a right to the sacraments. We can't just accept that." But maybe we can pull back a little bit again to the vaccine. So we were talking about this idea of form and matter, and again from Aristotle, we get the idea that the form and matter are what make us up. It's he used a big word, heliomorphism, that we are this combination of the matter that is the bearer of the information, the form that tells us what we are. And so what is it about this, the concerns that if we have a messenger RNA injected into our cells that starts playing with the code in our cells? So maybe you can link that to the philosophy for us.
Sure. So let's say that the segments of the mRNA are picked up by a retrovirus and injected into the DNA. When that happens, it's called the provirus. So that tells you that, in fact, we know that happens. That does happen. There probably are many systems of mixing and matching that's going on. But again, I don't want the listener to be tempted into saying, "Oh, well, so what? So what? Biology's mixing and matching all the time.
Yes.
That's how natural selection works." And well, yes, but the key word there is natural selection, right? So natural selection. We Catholics have a trust in natural law.
Yes.
So, you know, we do understand the importance of genetic mixing. It's called procreation,
Right.
but that is the natural process for it. And indeed, if viruses are involved, if biology 30 years hence discovers that viruses actually play an important role in moving genetic material around extrasexually, then fine enough. But that's a natural process, and
right. We're not intervening, injecting it into our cells. It just the virus. If those are just things that are part of the natural ecology, for lack of a better word. But this is artificial.
Right, and
this is our
if we're trusting any.
Yes.
If we're trusting any type of injection, we're trusting that it's a divine,
yes,
a divinely ordained
yes.
development in nature.
Yes. Wow. So maybe because we're running up about kind of our time for our hour discussion, maybe, and you start in the beginning with the civilization you talked about. So we've talked about on the individual
Right.
level, we've raised moral issues about mutilation of our bodies for no therapeutic reason, the great risks to our health, right? That we might be, we're taking this thing that could cause autoimmune disease. We just don't know because it's such a radical alteration, may cause increased cancer, things they would have never discovered in a few months of trials, all those concerns.
Right.
But now link this to the civilizational level. I think that you sort of talked about how this could, in the beginning, how this could be connected to that.
Right. And so I'll try to do this by parsing it into the dangers and then what I hope are the positive directions we could take. So as we recognize, the Great Reset, it seems to have been planned. A lot of we don't know how, but a lot of this is being rolled together as a Great Reset in the economies and societies of the world, and probably the population numbers. So let's think about some of the damaging things that are done when we interfere with what I call the central dogma of civilization. So in parallel fashion, again, the central dogma is this repository that we have of what makes our civilizations, and I'm not just talking about Western civilization, any civilization, but a civilization has its library of important books. You know, one immediately thinks of things like the Bible. You know,
yes,
all the way down to something simple like a dictionary. And these really help shape who we are and how we act. And the caretakers of those things and the people who take those messages from those library locations, and we're speaking very abstractly here, you know, but universities, seminaries, etc., take that information out to society, out to the marketplace, out to the workshops, out to the courts, out to the government, all the bureaucracies. Those people, well, they're the priests, they're the philosophers, the engineers, the journalists, the artists, what have you. And this is an area which I would like to provoke our fellow Catholics to reconsider. We have, in large part, other than maybe law, but even there we could tune it up, couldn't we?
Oh yeah.
We have abdicated our roles. We have a fair number of physicians, but in the world of science, arts, journalism, any number of them, we have abandoned these fields, and therefore we have no position at the table to be discussing them with the authority that we should. So that's my little plug there for more young people and their parents to be thinking along those lines. Another thing is that an important part of the process of messaging that information involves communication and contemplation. You could think of communication as being verbal, contemplation as being nonverbal. Catholics should immediately think of something like prayer when they're thinking of contemplation.
Yes.
So we are not protecting those two essential modes of messaging, and one of the simple ways in which we're failing to do that is by masking. So facial expression is one of the very important parts of communication. We're damaging it already with cell phones, and we're damaging it really on the input side with things like movies and television shows, right? Because then we start patterning unrealistic systems of communication. And one of the things I see, and all of this creates anxiety, right? Because we're not communicating our internal states well. And one of the things that society has been moving in the direction of, and I think that this whole lockdown kind of not only does it exaggerate, but it exploits, is a kind of obsessive compulsive disorder pattern that is projected on society, on the mass of people. The hand washing, the running away from people, the social avoidance.
Right. Calling it obsessive compulsive is interesting, because if anyone knows about the disease of being obsessive compulsive, you get sort of obsessed with some particular detail, but you sort of ignore others. So you get so focused on some obsession that actual other important things. And if you notice, that's what I see. If you go out to the store, I was checking out at the store during this nonsense, and the person checking me out went and picked up all the things that we're checking out with and is handling them and scanning them and wrapping them in tissue paper and putting them in a bag, and then says, "Oh, I need your phone number because I can't print you a receipt, because if I touch the receipt, I could get you sick. So I have to text it to your phone." And I thought, this is OCD. Like, I'm OCDing about not printing a receipt, but I've just touched everything that you have. I mean, it's just, it creates these behaviors that get obsessed about, wearing a mask, for example, but then not caring about other things that could actually be more significant in terms of transmitting communicable diseases.
And there's a couple of things, now that you mention this.
Yes.
There are a couple of things about OCD. One is it seems to grow out of situations where there is a lot of free-floating anxiety.
Yes.
Right? So people don't know where to direct that anxiety. Yes. So we have been rushing headlong in a very intense way for the last 70 years into very odd arrangements of human living that are just not family oriented. They're contraceptive. They're antenatal, and And as a biologist, this just pains me because we are deeply wired to interact in those ways, and even people who aren't married, don't have children, they still participate in society as
Yes.
an overall project of child rearing and education, or providing infrastructure for all that. So we've
Yes.
wiped all this out. We've said really what your life is about is hedonism. It's about stimulating yourself with just imagery, electronic imagery, and it doesn't work. And people are they're not doing it verbally usually, but in their stresses and strains and their abnormal behaviors, they're telling us that this really does not work. And I think, Catholics who are failing to speak up are failing. They're failing to introduce into all of this introduce into the field of psychology. Paul Vitz he's a psychologist who's talked about this, is the importance of having virtues and vices as concepts central to psychological theorizing and psychiatric theorizing. So that's
again,
one more area.
Excellent. And again, so we've always said the Great Reset is of everything. They want a new church, a one world church. They want new government. They want new economy. They want new human beings. They want to transform us.
Yes.
And so that's this connection again, Dr. Schmitt. Really, we should call you a neurologist and a philosopher, because a great philosopher that you are. That the vaccine, this messenger RNA, is really a part of this Great Reset. If you think of it that way, it's like we want to reset the civilization. It starts at the molecular level by resetting, in a certain sense, the cells, by messing with, technical term, the information, the RNA information, injecting that into the cell. And it sort of epitomizes this Great Reset from top to bottom, from the cell to the civilization. And that's clearly of great concern. So again, to wrap
messing
up
with, or you could have said messengering with.
Very true. So again, for our readers, I hope you've gotten some information out of this. We're just trying to provide you with some information to think about, and to get the idea that unlike the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, with our Bishop Strickland in Tyler, Texas being a great exception, this is a much more complicated issue than their little 30-second cartoon video they let out that, hey, this is great, we have a vaccine. It's got the abortion complexity on it, but it also has the moral issue of prudence. And we are all bound to be prudent in our decisions. And that means we have to, whatever we want to do in all of our decisions, whether it's, should I take Tylenol because I have a headache? Should I take aspirin? Should I, and there are small decisions, but should I take this vaccine? Prudence demands that we look at all these issues, consider them, inform ourselves, weigh them, and say, wow, do I really need to mutilate my cells for a non-therapeutic purpose for a disease that I have a 99% chance of surviving if I even get it? And that level of prudence, we as Catholics, as human beings, are called to do. And that's the bishops are glossing over completely, telling us, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, nothing to think about here. Just go roll up your sleeve and get some foreign RNA injected into your cells without even giving it these deep considerations that Dr. Schmitt has given us. So I hope that gives you, food for thought, and ties together a lot of these concerns on the Great Reset, COVID-19, how it's being used. Archbishop Vigano has talked about this a lot in the letters we've published, his meditation on COVID-19 and on the Great Reset that we published a few weeks ago. But I think this scientific discussion brings a real point to it on the biological level. So thank you, Dr. Schmitt, for joining us. I hope our viewers have enjoyed this. Maybe we can have you come back another time to continue some of these broader discussions, particularly your point on the contraceptive culture. We'll maybe schedule a time to come back and talk about that point in a little more detail. But thank you, and we really wish you the best in your continued research. And if our viewers have enjoyed this content, please share this information. This has been packed with a lot of information, scientific and philosophical. Share it with all your contacts. Be an apostle of our message. Get it out. And if you've liked it, subscribe to our Rumble or YouTube channels, and then also consider subscribing to our monthly periodical, Catholic Family News. The January issue will be out in a few days, packed with a lot of great content. You can sign up online and get electronic access as soon as it's available, January 1st. So thank you all for your listening, your attention. May God bless you to the end of this new year, and may 2021 be a holy and happy year for you. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.
Ite Israel